Welcome to Spoiler Piece Theater, the podcast that doesn't give a shit about spoilers. We just want to talk about the movies. My name is Evan Crean. My pronouns are he, him. I am co-chair of the Boston Online Film Critics Association and co-author of your 80s Movie Guide to Better Living.
My name is Megan Kearns. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a contributor to Edge Media Network, and I too am a member of the Boston Online Film Critics Association.
And I'm Dave Riedel. I write about movies. My pronouns are he, him, and I am also a member of the Boston Online Film Critics Association.
Yeah, you are.
I am. I don't know if anybody has ever mentioned this on the show, but that's a lot of words to get out for the name of a critics association.
Yes. It's not easy. That's why we often go by BAFCA.
Yeah.
Much easier to say.
True.
Anyway, we are here to talk about movies per usual. We've got 3 movies that we're going to be talking about. First, before we get to those, just want to say over on our Patreon exclusive audio for this week, we are talking about the 1953 Ida Lupino directed and written film, The Hitchhiker. So if you... Sorry, lost my train of thought. You should check out our Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/spoilerpiece. You can toss us a couple bucks each month and you get exclusive audio like this week's segment on The Hitchhiker. You get to vote in polls and other goodies, so definitely check that out. For this week's show, we have got 2 documentaries and 1 horror film. We're going to talk about the documentary On Broadway. We are going to be talking...
You guys are silly. Giggling about documentaries and horror.
It's like, I mean...
I guess you're right.
and neither of them is a documentary about horror, so, you know.
Exactly.
No, that's true.
Yeah, we got theater elbows, happy trees, and we've got a family that wants to kill each other.
Right.
It's quite the combination. So that's On Broadway. That is Bob Ross, Happy Accidents, Betrayal, and Greed. Let's not forget any of those things. And we need to do something. So we're going to start by talking about the documentary On Broadway.
Can we talk about the George Benson song instead? I mean, not that I didn't like On Broadway, the documentary, but I love that song.
It's a good song.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. So, as you might guess, On Broadway is a documentary about Broadway. It's directed by Oren Jacoby. It's basically kind of a history of Broadway, but more from like the 60s era Broadway through present day, kind of the evolution of it when, you know, New York and Times Square was considered like a seedy area, and the Broadway and theater seemed like it was kind of like on the verge of collapse. And then kind of through the 70s and in the 80s experienced a renaissance again and kind of propelled us into the present day. So it's one of those talking head documentaries with lots of interviews. It's also got this element of looking at a present day show. And when I say present day, I mean the 2018 through 2019 Broadway season. So this was shot pre-pandemic. And looking at that season through the lens of a new show called The Nap. And so we get some kind of behind the scenes stuff on that show kind of interspersed throughout this like talking head interview piece about kind of the history of Broadway. Is there anything that I missed from the summary?
I think that's a pretty good summary.
That was an excellent summary.
Shucks.
Good job.
So what did we think of On Broadway?
I'm curious, especially Dave, because I know you hate musical theater.
Yeah,
I'm curious.
Well, this is a little bit different from. I mean, it's not like we're watching Cats. Thank God.
We are watching.
Although there are clips of Cats as well as many other productions.
Yep. But the history of. I mean, if you think about Broadway is like. You know, you think about the Oscars or the Golden Globes or the Emmys or whatever, and the Emmys are like. All primetime television, and the Golden Globes that's such a wide net of this kind of movie and this kind of television show and cinematographers, and then you have the Tonys, which is like only shows that appear on Broadway. So just the whole concept of Broadway as a thing, I think is kind of fascinating because it's so insular.
Mhm.
And this is kind of a pull the curtain back and reveal the wizard kind of thing. And I kind of got a kick out of it. I mean, I'm still not a fan of musical theater generally, but to see the history of just how Broadway had to reinvent itself several times because of, you know, New York being on the verge of bankruptcy in the late 60s and the early 70s. And, you know, that's when, you used to have the shows like you said theater elbows in the intro, Evan, and you used to have the theater elbow shows, like just fucking like, hey, how do you do, hey. That doesn't really sound like theater elbows, but
it's your interpretation of it. And
that's my interpretation of theater elbows.
Yeah, and I know you use
just
that
think
term.
of people being happy and yeah. Well, when I say that, I mean, think about people being happy and skipping along. That's kind of what I mean by theater elbows, you know, breaking into song for no reason whatsoever. And then, you know, New York goes through a, hard financial times and, you know, there are empty buildings and empty blocks and, you know, Broadway attendance it goes from 11 million
to 4 million.
to 4 million over the course of 4 years. And that's when people like Sondheim come in and start writing shows. Now, I don't know specifically if Sondheim wrote a chorus line, but one of the things I think is interesting is that, thank you, is this is when you start to get shows about shows also, which is just sort of fascinating. And how you had these newer voices who were doing all kinds of cool, crazy stuff as far as theater people were concerned. And yeah, I kind of just dug hearing about the history, even though, you know, this movie's 80 minutes long, 85 minutes long. It's pretty short. But there's a lot of stuff crammed in there. And I'm sure that there's a lot of stuff they're leaving out for the sake of either expediency or, you know, it's a loving portrait of Broadway. It's not like these fucking people ruined everything. I mean, there's a little bit of that. But I just kind of thought it was interesting. I also like how a lot of the people interviewed have really mixed emotions about the big 80s explosion of English musicals coming in and redefining what Broadway was like, especially having seen Miss Saigon and then seeing it and having completely forgotten Jonathan Pryce, basically humping that car in one scene.
I thought you were going to talk about the racism of that show.
Oh, well, there's that too. I'm pretty sure that
instead it's the car humping.
Well, it's just, I mean, Miss Saigon is such a terrible show from start to
It's
finish.
a mess.
And I don't mean that as a person who dislikes musical theater. This is coming from a person who like knows the difference between like good and bad. And it's just a bad show.
Listen, I love musical theater and I think it's a mess.
Yeah.
So.
And also the night that I saw it, I can't remember the main character's name. When she kills herself with the gun at the end, the gun didn't go off.
Oh God.
So she just had to like fall through the curtain.
Oh no.
So it's like, oh, I hope everybody realized that's what she was doing back there. So, and just like the expanse, the one musical that I've really enjoyed from start to finish, I always liked Les Mis on the stage. I thought the movie was crap, as you know.
The musical on stage is amazing. It's incredible.
Well, and this is what I've said. It's like it's, all the gaps in logic that show has, you can sort of overlook them through the spectacle of it. I mean, watching the way the ramparts come together, for example, I mean, it's just like, it's fucking cool. You don't give a shit that nothing makes sense. It's cool, you know?
Yeah.
Yes.
I would argue the same with Phantom of the Opera. The spectacle of that production is absolutely gorgeous. The production design is amazing. Lion King, also amazing with the puppetry and the costuming. Yeah, you are 100% right, Dave. I completely agree with you about Les Mis.
Yeah, and then seeing how everyone's like, we're gonna take Julie Taymor and have her do the Lion King. That's crazy. And then it's like totally earth shattering. And I just thought that stuff was cool. And then also talking about, shows like Rent, which is not a show that I like, but I appreciate that it addresses being broke and maybe having HIV and queer stories and all that kind of stuff. When that stuff was new to Broadway, I just think that's really cool. So 82 minutes. Yeah, I enjoyed that 82 minutes. Whatever. It's not earth-shattering, but it was a good time.
Yeah, I agree with you, Dave. I found this, obviously it's a love letter to Broadway, which I think is really interesting considering the juxtaposition of what's also being discussed, in that it is a really interesting look at the history of Broadway and the artistry of theater, but it also looks at the impact of finance and massive gentrification.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, and that's something when people talk about the quote unquote cleaning up of Times Square, they don't really, I mean, somebody did mention the displacement, but kind of in a like, yeah, we're going to displace people and things,
Right.
like as if it's this great thing, you know? And I'm like, well, wait a minute. What about all the homeless people? What about all the people who are, you know, addicts? And what about all the people, you know, who are sex workers? You know, where do they go? And, you know, that's the thing, is that so often when we talk about the cleaning up, quote unquote, cleaning up of New York City and specifically of Times Square, they never talk about that, you know, or are concerned about that. So it's really interesting, this love letter to Broadway, which I think is great. And musical theater is near and dear to my heart. I love it. And so I loved seeing that history, but it's also interesting to see that impact. It's interesting to see the impact, of course, of the AIDS epidemic, which, I mean, how could that not have such a huge impact? It had a huge impact on everything. And also bringing in inclusive and diverse stories of queer people and people of color, seeing obviously Rent and seeing August Wilson and seeing Lin-Manuel Miranda, like hearing these interviews and seeing these stories and discussing it really was great to see. So yeah, so I also really enjoyed this. And I always find it interesting when, like you said, Dave, I think you articulated it perfectly, the kind of pulling back the curtain and, you know, kind of seeing the wizard. You're welcome. And because I love film and I love musical theater, but I also love learning about the history of it and how it came to be, and how, like, especially one of the parts that really stuck out so much to me was, and this is not a surprise because it's had such a huge impact on entertainment and the film industry as a whole, as well as merchandising. But when Disney had the biggest theater on Broadway, and like that's just mind blowing to think about, that they had the biggest theater on Broadway and what a huge impact Disney had, and Michael Eisner specifically had on theater. And it's just wild. But anyway, also another thing too is that commercial of Cats, and Cats, no, Cats is a no. And but also the commercial, like showing clips of other Broadway productions. Like I remember growing up and seeing ads of Cats on TV and Les Mis on TV and A Chorus Line and Phantom of the Opera. And I lived for those because when I was a kid, I couldn't afford to go to New York and go to see live theater. So it was like a dream. So to see it on TV and to watch the Tony Awards, which is still hands down my favorite award show because I love the musical numbers. Yeah, it's just, there's something interesting. And so to see all of that and to see how that push came to be to lure more people to come buy tickets and to boost ticket revenues, it's just, I think it's really, really interesting to look at it all contextually.
I was not a fan of this documentary.
Oh,
you might have suspected from my quietness. I think there's definitely...
I did suspect because I know you don't like talking heads.
Yeah, I don't love talking heads. I think there's some interesting elements to this documentary. I liked seeing some of the stats. Like one of the most staggering stats to me was this idea that in the 2018-2019 Broadway season, there would be 38 shows that are debuting.
Oh, yep.
And they said 75% of those would probably flop out of 38 shows. That's so many.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah,
that's Broadway, baby.
Well, I loved that line later on in the documentary. It's not called show charity, it's called show business. I think was another really a thing that I responded to, all this kind of what seems like mostly passive aggressive commentary about the rising, skyrocketing prices of Broadway tickets and how it's it's become so inaccessible to most people to go see Broadway shows because it's so damn expensive and so competitive to get tickets. I feel like that was kind of an underlying thing that I enjoyed seeing in the documentary, and maybe could have gone more into that. I mean, there's a good breadth in terms of like amount of time that's like covered in the documentary. I think, I don't know, the present day show stuff didn't feel like it meshed too well, but for like, I enjoyed the commentary about having a trans performer in the show. What's the performer's name? Alexandra Billings. I remember seeing her in Disclosure, and so I really did enjoy that part of it, but I feel like that was almost a different documentary. Like we could have gone behind the scenes on like a show, and from start to finish, and maybe seen that from that perspective. So that part didn't really work for me. Yeah, very heavy on talking heads. And one of the things that I found staggering in a documentary about Broadway is they did not mention Fiddler on the Roof once, not even in a clip, not in passing. And like they had 2 opportunities to talk about it. Like they could have talked about it in the earlier Broadway history, but it's like one of the most enduring Broadway shows, and they don't even show a clip of it.
It is.
And more recently, they did an all Yiddish version of it, which was extremely popular and kept getting extended. And so like I thought maybe they could talk about that in present day, because they were, they talk a lot about shows that were like game changers, and I feel like that's kind of like the documentary's point in like everything's the same in Broadway until someone takes a big risk and does something outside the norm, which for me became a like repetitive piece that for like the last like half hour, I feel like we just kept summing up that point over and over again. But another opportunity to talk about like, here's something that's completely different. Like the average person doesn't understand or speak Yiddish, but it's popular because it's like it's still accessible. So anyway, I just thought that was a weird and glaring omission among many shows, which I understand there's a limited amount of time, but not even showing a clip of something, because there's many shows they just show like a momentary clip in passing. So anyway, I thought that was strange.
It is weird. And I'm not trying to defend it because it is very bizarre, especially, you're absolutely right, considering the Yiddish production. The only reason I'm wondering why is because it originally came out in 1964, which predates when this documentary starts, which is in 69. But it's still, there have been so many revivals. It is really weird.
Yeah. It just felt like a very strange omission. Anyway, I kept thinking like, oh, they'll talk about it, or they'll show a clip of it, or they'll show something about it. But it's strange to not include it in any capacity. But yeah, I mean, I think that I've summed up most of my issues with the documentary in terms of like the being heavy on talking heads, being kind of repetitive, and like what we're talking about. And then like this other piece, which I think could have been its own interesting, separate documentary, possibly kind of making its way. It almost was like sneaking in occasionally. Like in the wings. It was like hiding in the wings, and then like occasionally it would like pop out from behind the curtain.
Remember me?
Don't forget about me. I'm still here. I think that's all I had to say about this documentary.
All fair criticisms. I mean, I've never seen Fiddler on the Roof, so it's not a documentary. It's not a musical that I've come to hate simply because I haven't seen it. So, but
I watched it as a kid.
Yeah, I think I've seen like I feel like I've seen T'Pol. It's probably the movie, right? Was T'Pol in the movie?
Yeah.
Topol.
Yeah, he was.
You know why I said T'Pol? It's because that's how they pronounce it in Notting Hill.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that is kind of interesting, though. I don't know. I was also fascinated by the 80s and bringing the HIV/AIDS epidemic into it. But, Megan, you already talked about that. So.
I liked that part of the documentary too. I think those are important kind of pieces in Broadway history, and especially the kind of changing of the tides like between the 80s and 90s, and telling stories that were covering new ground. And I think the fact that they were telling these stories on stage allowed other industries, film and television, to break ground into these stories as well, because they were part of like a popular culture. Like the the merchandise, you know, they're talking about that in Rent, you know, Rent merchandise was everywhere.
Mhm.
So I feel like there were, you know, the musicals were a way for people to kind of like access these subjects that, you know, in stories that, you know, weren't being told in other places, and kind of gave them opportunity to infiltrate the culture more.
Yeah, I thought one of the really interesting points I thought was someone was talking about how in the 40s and the 50s, Broadway music was everywhere. Like it was on the radio, and there were so many, you know, filmic adaptations of musicals. And then it became so uncool to like musical theater. And then, and then it does have this resurgence, and then the merchandising is everywhere. And and it is really, really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Now I want to go and listen to the Rent soundtrack and Wicked and Les Mis.
Nice.
And Hamilton again, and watch Hamilton for like the umpteenth time. That's, I think, something really interesting too, is that the filmed versions of live shows, like I have a DVD version of the last Rent production, and I watch Hamilton quite frequently on Disney Plus. And I've seen the Spike Lee directed filming of the production of Passing Strange, which is really great and has great cinematography. No surprise, because it's Spike Lee. But yeah, I would love to see more filmed adaptations of musicals, because you can listen to the soundtracks and that's nice too, but you don't get the same effect as seeing someone on stage. And you're so right, Evan. I mean, I'm glad that the film talks about it. And it is this undercurrent that it is so inaccessible to so many people. It really is an elitist pastime and art form, because it is so exclusive and prohibitive to most people. So that's why I would love to see more filmed productions, because I feel like that would open the door to more accessibility for more people.
Yeah, agreed. So should we move on to Bob Ross?
Yes,
Sure.
let's do it.
So Bob Ross, Happy Accidents, Betrayal, and Greed. No punctuation in the title card, but punctuation on the the IMDb, a comma after Happy Accidents, but no Oxford comma. I don't know why. That's something I'm a stickler about, the Oxford comma. So of course
I love the Oxford comma.
This is
Big fan.
a doc that's directed by Joshua Rofe, if I'm reading that correctly, based on the accent on the E there. It's on Netflix, so it's I feel like that was definitely coming up in the like top movies being watched on Netflix, which no surprise.
Yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of us have watched Bob Ross in varying capacities, whether that be late at night when we couldn't sleep and, you know, Bob Ross soothed us back to sleep, or soothed us to asleep, which has happened. I've definitely watched Bob Ross to go to sleep because he's such a calming presence. And he just has this presence in pop culture. He just throughout pop culture, like he's like, people know him, people love him. And so, of course, you know, with like a salacious title, you know, Happy Accidents, Betrayal, and Greed, you're like, I guess I expect this to be like super salacious. I don't think that it is, but we talked about this before we were on the mic. There's a New York Times piece that I had seen recently. It's a short report about Bob Ross, and I think the author was looking to buy a Bob Ross painting or something like that, and kind of dove deep and found out kind of where Bob Ross's paintings are, and the company that kind of, you know, is the steward of his legacy. And it's this very positive kind of like heartwarming kind of piece in the way it's reported, and I just thought it was really interesting juxtaposition against this documentary, which is telling the story from his son's perspective. And it basically is like the counterpoint to that report of like, you know, here's this couple that, you know, own Bob Ross, the rights to everything Bob Ross, and they have like, you know, rigid control over it. And like they didn't do anything illegal, but they definitely did some stuff that was unsavory to get the rights
and unethical
to get the rights to Bob Ross's legacy, to the point where his own son can't even use his last name to like market his own painting and other stuff. He's like,
I think
ridiculous.
he was given back the right to use his last name.
Was he?
Well, I don't know about in promotional materials, but he can say my name is Steve Ross. I mean, I guess it's probably a split hair kind of thing.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So I think, although the title, I think, portrays a much more salacious doc, I think what's interesting is the details of Bob Ross's life and kind of how this couple that he befriended ended up kind of taking over his legacy, and now they're like the arbiters of Bob Ross. Anyway, what do we think? That's kind of like the broad strokes, to use a painting pun. What did we think of the doc itself,
Megan?
Okay. I mean, it's obviously incredibly sad what happened to Steve Ross, Bob Ross's son. And it's really sad regarding the alleged, corruption and the suing, and that he sued them first because he was advised that it would be easier to sue them first because they're supposedly sue happy. Honestly, I was much more interested in the scenes with Bob Ross because as you just said, we all have watched Bob Ross, and by all, I mean the three of us, I'm going to assume.
Yeah.
And, I love the scenes with him. I love Peapod the squirrel, the little shirt pocket squirrel, and the robins and the fox biting his hair. I was dying. I was like, the fox is on his shoulders biting his hair. This is the cutest thing ever. And I was, crying at the end because it's incredibly sad and touching. His son talking about how Annette Kowalski said to him, "You must be glad it's over." And I do understand what that sentiment is, because the fact that Bob Ross was sick at the end. But it's such a cruel thing to say to someone nonetheless, because you don't know how someone is handling grief or handling the death of their parent. And the fact that, he was talking about how, no, he doesn't feel that way. He wished he could have another moment with his father. And it was really touching and really sad, of course. But also for me personally, it was so sad because, I've been watching Bob Ross since I was a kid. And, as someone myself who had a very chaotic and abusive childhood, his kindness and his gentleness and supportive, encouraging manner was such a soothing balm. It was an emotional salve. And so in addition to his kind of ASMR, whisper voice and his lovely paintings, it just was, he was such a warm presence and to so many people. And yeah, so I loved the scenes with him. But it's interesting kind of talking about two documentaries, because when you were saying that about On Broadway, because I kind of got the sense that this was two documentaries in a way, where we have the lovely scenes with Bob Ross and we have, his history and background, and that his TV persona is pretty much who he is in real life, or pretty close to who he is in real life, which is I was like, phew, refreshing to see.
Oh, phew.
I was like, so one of the reasons I didn't want to see this documentary and is I didn't want my, view of him to be tainted. So that was, a relief, and that was great to see. But then there is this real awful sense of, corruption and, manipulation going on. And so to me, it kind of felt like two documentaries, but at the same time, I was kind of glad that it retained a positive view of Bob Ross himself. But it is incredibly tragic that he wanted the money and the company, the profits to go to his son and his son to benefit, and his son is not benefiting. And so it is really sad.
And it's tragic because he was on his deathbed, and the Kowalskis, according to this documentary, were basically begging him for the rights to his name. And he said, no, up and down, no. And still they ended up getting it.
Yep.
This is what happens when you leave 51% of your company to your half brother, I guess. I don't know. So don't leave 51% of your company to your half brother.
Don't set up a trust that way, because that was not a smartly
correct.
Right.
Like, I feel like that's also like a moral of the story is like, get a better lawyer to set up the trust, because this was not a well done trust, because it ended up hurting his son. And I know that was definitely not the intention. I think, to me, one of the more shocking revelations is that Bob Ross had an affair.
Well,
Oh, I had
mean,
read that before, so I knew that.
Yeah.
right. I mean, the Kowalskis, of course, deny that. I mean, that's no surprise.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah, I should clarify. I didn't know who it was. I just had read he had had at least one affair, if not others before.
Mm-hmm. So
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not the most extensively well-versed in Bob Ross history. So that was a revelation to me. It didn't really change or taint my opinion of him though. Like just seeing at least how he was in the rest of his life, in how he was so genuine, how he was so loving, caring, supportive to everyone in his life. I was like, okay, nobody's perfect. People have got their flaws. But like, at least on the whole, I know that Bob Ross is still who I expected him to be. Like he supported his son. He wanted the best for his son. He wanted his son to be in quote unquote the family business. And it's like, you know, on the one hand, like how mad can you be if he's like, he loved his son. He wanted him to be successful. He wanted to be more successful. He was like, you know, he basically was like, I want you to be bigger and have more success than me. And it's like, that's a nice thing for a parent to want, even if maybe he didn't always go about it in some of the best ways.
I think that's actually a really, and I say this as someone who's not a parent, so Dave, you could speak to this probably much better than I can. But I think that, I mean, from a lot of people I know, that's a pretty common thing for their parents, that their parents want them to be more successful than they are, especially like if you know, have parents who are immigrants. But yeah, I think what I do find really interesting though about your point, Evan, is that he wanted him to not be really successful in a very conventional way. He wanted him to be successful as an artist. And I think that's what's so refreshing and so lovely about his support is that, you know, yes, it's the family business. Yes, but it's artistry. And that's really nice.
Yeah, he wanted his son to succeed as a painter. And even seeing those clips from a show where he's like, my son here, he's way better at this stuff than me. It's like,
I know, that's so nice.
He didn't have to say those things on his show. Like the fact that he wanted to bring his son in, that he wanted. And like hearing, you know, that caused kind of a rift between them. And I was just relieved that, you know, they did reconnect and they did have a strong bond when he was sick and through that tough time. And I was floored by the idea that he was sick and he was doing like 3 shows a day because he was just so desperately throwing himself into work to just put out as much content as possible. So people basically got like as much Bob Ross as possible.
I know. It's so sad.
Yeah.
One of the things that I thought was interesting is how when you look at Steve's art, you don't see much of it in the movie, but you do see a little, like there's a few shots of some of his work in his studio, especially toward the end of the movie. Is he doesn't just do the landscapes; he does some abstract stuff, and then there are actually I don't know if I saw any portraits, but there are people in some of his paintings, which you know Bob Ross famously did not do people. I think there's one show where he has a campfire scene and there's like a figure of a person sitting by a campfire. I actually remember that show. But I had always wondered what happened to Steve over the years because I've watched The Joy of Painting since it came on YouTube a few years ago, and they would, you know, add an episode a week or 2 or 3 episodes a week. I don't remember. I'm not even going to tell you how many I've watched. So many.
Ditto.
Yeah. But it's funny though, when you watch Steve, first of all, if you know how TV works, some of the things are funny that you can tell that Bob like recorded intros separately from Steve and wasn't in the studio at the same time, but then other times he was standing right next to him. It's just so bizarre the way they did some of this stuff. But like I say, you can just see how uncomfortable Steve is on camera, especially when when Bob's introducing him. Once he gets into the painting, it's a little bit, you know, Steve is more in his element, but oh man, I just, I think that I'm not sure I learned anything that I didn't know other than, you know, Steve's point of view about things, which I'm glad that he got to tell his side of the story because the Kowalskis have been I mean, verbose isn't the right word, but they were more out in the public eye than Steve was,
right.
obviously.
I mean, and that New York Times report, I think, is a primary example of when you have money, you can use your
Shape the
you can
narrative.
shape the narrative to what you want it to be, which after watching that before, I was like, oh, this is I'm still feeling warm fuzzies about Bob Ross and, you know, this friendship and them carrying on his legacy. And then I watched this documentary. I'm like, this is the complete counterpoint to that other story. And it's just like clearly what you can do when you have the power to shape the narrative.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I more than anything, I just found it kind of sad, but, you know, it's bizarre to, as an amateur painter, very, very amateur. I have the liquid white. I don't use Bob Ross paints because they're actually pretty expensive. But you know, liquid white is magic. I'm just going to go ahead and put that out there. So, but they used to call it magic white, and then they changed it to liquid white at some point. I don't know why. I don't know. I feel like this documentary is maybe a little bit lopsided this is the problem. You know, I think what do the Kowalskis have to lose by going on camera and be like, this is all bullshit, you know, like just fucking go on. Like there's nothing that's going to stop, especially after Steve, lost his last legal case in 2019. There's nothing for the Kowalskis to lose, probably financially. I mean, if they just get up there and refute everything that Steve says, well, then, you know, it's their word against his. You know, Bob Ross is the kind of figure that, are you going to stop buying his stuff because you don't like the Kowalskis? I don't even know if that enters into people's minds. I don't know. There's boycotts
called for on Twitter after this doc.
Yeah.
Well,
I know.
We'll see how long they last.
Bob Ross themed things.
Yeah, well, I say that as someone who, before watching this documentary, I have the Bob Ross The Art of Chill game, which, by the way, is a great board game. I'm not going to lie. Yeah, it's an interesting one. Not going to lie. It's great. I love it. That is really interesting, Dave. And I'm always intrigued when people decline to participate in a documentary. And especially because the Kowalskis, I was reading an article at the Hollywood Reporter that was reporting on this because Melissa McCarthy and Ben Falcone, who produced this, they spoke about the documentary on NPR. And this article at the Hollywood Reporter was talking about it. And it was also talking about the Kowalskis put out a statement on the Bob Ross Incorporated website, talking about how they do refute everything. And aside from the fact that they say the documentary's depiction of Bob Ross is accurate, like the fact that he was like a nice guy. But other than that, they're like, no, that's not what happened. And it is interesting to me because they said that the reason they didn't participate, they do contend that, or they do say that the filmmakers reached out to them twice, but they said that they were not transparent and didn't include any questions. And that's the reason they didn't participate. And
didn't include any questions,
I'm glad,
please.
I know. I'm very glad the filmmakers decided to include the email.
Yeah.
Because, and it is kind of, we see it and then it's kind of obviously like cherry picked to highlight certain sentences. But from what I could see, it didn't say anything in there about like, hey, send us the questions or anything.
Right.
Like
yeah.
that.
It seemed like a blanket where no comment statement other than to say we disagree or think this is all false.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the whole idea that you're going to send, now granted, I don't know that I'd call this documentary journalism, but that's journalism 101. When the subject of the interview is like, send me the questions first. Fuck no. Right. Are you out of your mind?
Right.
So,
well, I think what's also on that note is it doesn't, from this article, it doesn't sound like the filmmakers were interested in doing a hit piece on the Kowalskis or that was even on their radar. seemed that the reason they started digging into this facet of the story is because they kept talking to people and being like, hey, we want to interview you about Bob Ross. And they're like, and people were like, no, we're not going to do it because of the Kowalskis. And so that they're like, well, wait a minute, what the hell's going on here? And so that seemed to be the reason that they did this. It wasn't that they were like looking to, paint them in a bad light.
Yeah, there's that bit.
Yeah, and that all makes sense.
There's that bit about how dozens of people who worked with Bob Ross refused to be part of this documentary, specifically citing the Kowalskis and fear of being sued as the reason why they would not go on the record.
Right. It is interesting because like I always watch a documentary with a very critical eye because I'm like, you can't take anything that a documentary says as factual because it's still crafting a narrative. It's still shaping a story. But from other things, kind of reading everything, like I said, it doesn't seem like that's the story they were looking to tell. If you have multiple people who are like, nope, not doing it, can't talk to you on the record, like that's suspicious. There's something going on. So even if it's not as horrible as Steve Ross says it is, like there's still something really shitty going on that they clearly don't want people to know about.
So, should we move on to our next film? Unless there's any other parting comments on the Bob Ross talk.
Bob Ross rocks, and so does Peapod.
Yes, that's something we can all agree on, early and often.
Yeah. I'll go with that.
Yes. Oh, I love you, Bob Ross.
All right. So now we're going from documentary land over to horror. We're going to be talking about We Need to Do Something. Which is directed by Sean King O'Grady and is written by Max Booth III. Their kind of IMDb plot summary here. After Melissa and her family seek shelter from a storm, they become trapped. With no sign of rescue, hours turn to days, and Melissa comes to believe that she and her girlfriend Amy might have something to do with the horrors that threaten and tear her family and the entire world apart. Yeah. That sums it up. I mean, family trapped in a bathroom. They go into a bathroom to hide from a storm, thinking they're going to be in there for, I don't know, maybe a couple hours. And then they get trapped in the bathroom. And when I say trapped, I mean trapped. The house collapses, a tree falls and blocks the door, so they can't even open the door. And they're trapped in the bathroom with nothing. Like they didn't bring phone chargers. They didn't bring food. They have water from the running faucet and some board games that they quickly abandon. And their phones, which end up dying.
Right.
Well, and Dad drops Melissa's phone.
Dad.
Right.
Okay. So I feel like there's probably some things to say about this movie. What did we think about it?
I fucking hated it.
I hated it. I just like... I sort of was, when they first, when it opens up and they kind of walk into the bathroom, it's like, all right, all the horror takes place off screen. Interesting. But I just kind of got caught up in first of all, you've got mom and dad. I think Pat Healy's really good. And I think Vanessa Shaw is really good. But I didn't believe for a moment that these two were an actual married couple simply because of the way. And I know people who hate each other who are married, but these people, it's just like they didn't even know each other.
Yeah, we love Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf.
Yeah.
That's two people who hate each other who are married.
But then I thought that, there's so much going on out past the door that they can't get through. Mm-hmm. I understand the idea of low budget horror and doing everything in one room. Fine. But there's just so much going on outside the door, like somebody's shot and killed in front of them, and then mom comes back at the end of the movie covered in blood, and then you've got this weird fucking homophobic, these two lesbian girls accidentally ended the world because, the one who's a cutter like did the spell wrong. I mean, it's just fucking ugly.
Right. Yeah.
So I mean, is that why you hated it, Megan?
Yes, and more.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought this movie was fucking pointless. And I almost never say that about a film. Like, even films I don't enjoy, I don't think they're pointless. I thought this was pointless. And I love a chamber piece. I think a contained environment is really interesting, or can be. I think the acting in this is atrocious. I think Vanessa Shaw is terrible. I think Pat Healy is terrible. I think I think the kid is terrible. Bobby. I think Sierra McCormick is the only one who comes out slightly unscathed, because I loved her in The Vast of Night. I know you guys didn't love that film. I did. I think she was great in it. And I think she's okay here. I think she's doing the best she can. I think the dialogue is bad. I think the characters are written poorly. The father, and I'm sure we're going to get into it, because Evan, I could tell by your expression when you mention him that I'm sure we're going to get into him more. He's so despicable and unlikable. And of course, that's the point. Right. But I don't feel like his character is saying anything interesting narratively or thematically, nor is the film saying anything compelling or interesting or empathetic about being in an abusive relationship or having an emotionally abusive parent. And about the queer couple, Dave, I am so glad you brought that up, because I was excited at first. I was like, oh, okay, maybe this movie's going to get better. It's centering a queer couple. But one, I didn't find them believable as a couple at all. Mm-hmm. And I was extremely uncomfortable with its depiction of self-harm and suicidal ideation, that it was literally demonized. And I felt it made it salacious in a really kind of creepy way. And which is strange, because I read in the director's interview in the press notes that he consciously tried to be really sensitive to that and show that she wasn't doing self-harm to get attention or anything like that. Like, she really thought she was dead and wanted to feel something. And sure, okay, but it just, I don't think it was done effectively at all.
Yeah.
At all.
Well, I'm just going to break in. It's kind of like, it's show versus tell, right? And she says, I'm dead. I think that there's something inside me maybe that isn't dead. And it's like, okay, so you told us that. Who fucking cares? You know?
Right.
It's like,
right. Who cares about you as a character? Who cares about that? Who cares? Yeah. The only thing I will say, I also disliked the supernatural occult component. And not because I dislike that component always in a horror film, but I didn't think it worked here. The one thing I will say, or actually there's two things I will say on the semi-positive side. I will say I think the practical effects for the snake were pretty good, because I read that was a puppet, and I was like, ooh, that was a really good puppet.
A rattlesnake that gets into the bathroom with them and gets the brother and then later the dad.
Yeah, and warning, animal cruelty, because the snake gets his head bitten off.
Yep.
Yeah, but the other thing I will say is, when, to its credit, I will say the one scene that I liked was when they hear the dog off screen, and I was lulled into a false sense of security and kind of complacency when Bobby's like, oh, the dog, he's licking my hand. Isn't he so cute? And then I was genuinely shocked when we hear this eerie human voice saying, like, I'm a good boy. And I was like, holy fuck, what is this movie?
Yeah, then she rips the tongue off and like throws it, and it's still pulsating and alive, and she like eats the live tongue. Oh, yeah, that was genuinely shocking and gross, and just made my skin crawl.
Yeah, so pretty good special or practical effects there, and nice touch on the surprise element. But other than that, I absolutely despised everything about this.
Yeah, I don't think I hated this as much as you two. I agree with like most, if not all, of the criticisms of it, though. I didn't find the relationship, the relationship that didn't feel like there was chemistry. It didn't feel believable. I don't think that element of the plot was woven in super well, like the supernatural elements and the idea that this really could be the result of some type of hell on earth kind of situation where they've fucked up this ritual with the tongue, and that's why there's God knows whatever evil snakes, weird talking demon dog or human things like. So I don't know. The dialogue is terrible. It's like very poorly written. That's something I can agree with. I didn't think the performances were terrible. I like this idea because it did hold my attention of people being trapped in a room together, and the human nature aspect of we're all going to turn on each other sooner or later, especially people in their family. And also, I don't know, does the dad did scare me in that like scary abusive guy live wire kind of situation, like, you know, being more scared of what he's going to do than really anything outside of the room, because, you know, for the most part, it's kind of null with the door closed. You know, it's like he's the greatest threat in the room, really.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. I mean, drinking the Listerine should have been your first tip off.
Sucking the alcohol pads. That was, I was like, I'm pretty sure that's not, you can't, your body can't digest that kind of alcohol. So when his eyeballs were bleeding later, I was like, yep, that's pretty sure that's the result of sucking on the alcohol pads.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they also didn't know how to handle a snake bite. I mean, one of them is saying do a tourniquet. The other's like, no, I got to suck out the poison. Both are wrong. You don't do either of those. So
right.
Yeah.
You know?
And
I'm not really surprised that he didn't realize the repercussions of the alcohol pads. I knew it. I mean, I don't know about you guys. I knew right away he was going to be a douche because he was like yelling and swearing a lot. And not, you know, not that you can't swear, especially in a crisis, but I was like, this guy is like really like aggressive. Like he's toxic as fuck.
Yeah, the way he was kind of like heaving and sighing in front of the mirror.
Yes.
And, you know, he's clutching his thermos. Yeah, you know he's an asshole from the beginning. And you don't know what shade of asshole. Like if he's just a shitty, cranky old man dad, or if he's like, you know, abusive, alcoholic. And we find out he's some combination of all neglectful.
All
like
the
you find
above.
out that he was just not even around for one of his kids being born. His wife gave birth in the friggin' grocery store.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and also the end, open-ended endings to movies can be frustrating to me. Sometimes I'm on board with them, sometimes I'm not. This one I found frustrating. It's like,
for sure.
we sat through all of this. We still don't ultimately. I mean, there's I guess a reasonable certainty that whatever failed ritual caused this end of the world or whatever, but not knowing what's going on outside and not getting the answers for a movie that's an hour and a half, but to me felt much longer than an hour and a half. I couldn't.
Yes.
It just dragged on. The pacing was just
Mhm.
god awful.
It was terrible.
I also just don't. I'm as we all know an atheist, but I just don't. Let's just say I was a believer. I don't accept the notion that two teenage girls could accidentally bring about the end of the world. I just don't buy that. It just.
Well, I don't like the notion that it's two queer girls who are bringing the fucking apocalypse. That's just awful.
There's that, and but you know, the whole thing I found the word I wrote most in my I only wrote it once, but I wrote it in all caps. Unpleasant. You know,
Yeah,
just
I
like
did too.
just. You know,
too.
I mean, you know, if I'm going to watch something unpleasant like Solo or something like that, then how about some artistry?
Yes.
This is just. I mean, I sort of appreciate how many different ways they found to film the bathroom, because it's like that's a small space and that camera is in a million different places.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, like, why does the house look like, you know, a weird 50s combined with the 70s combined with Frank Lloyd Wright holdover kind of thing? and also where the movie finally lost me, because I was just kind of like, all right, this is fucking get it over with. When Dad started shoving the little boy, whose name I can't remember, through the door, I thought it was going to be one of those things
Bobby.
where like he was shoving him so hard, where like you started to hear the bones in his skull crack. It was just so awful. And I was just like, you know, I really like horror movies. I like watching people get stabbed to death and, you know, like heads blown off and things like that, except in Suicide Squad. But, you know, this was just like, just so mean spirited and also just kind of dumb. I just. The whole idea. Oh no, it's fine. The whole idea is like, oh, the actual horrific thing is the family. Well, of course. I mean,
no shit.
For Christ's sake. I mean, just pat is another word I would use.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I didn't have a problem with the performances the way you did, Megan, but I just it just didn't work really on any level, and I share, Evan, your frustration with the open-ended ending. Like, you know, Mom's been out there. She's covered in blood when she comes back in, and then something follows her in and scares her and the daughter and probably eats them.
Just
or something.
Goes to red. With like she screams.
Yeah,
it goes to red.
And it's like, a lot of times when you figure out what the thing is that's causing the horror in a horror movie, that kind of ruins it. But this is one of those rare instances I feel like we actually need to know a little more, because this is just like, as far it may as well be like Ozzy Osbourne played the voice of the dog. If Ozzy Osbourne came in there and was like, I'm a good boy, I'm gonna be like, shut the fuck up, Ozzy Osbourne. It was just awful. I fucking hated it.
I didn't know if actually it was Ozzy Osbourne or that was just the name of the dog, because then there was also about a voice, but I didn't know if it was the other guy's voice anyway. Was it actually Ozzy Osbourne?
Ozzy Osbourne played the voice of the dog.
Actually, wow, that's
interesting.
Is that why they talked about him and biting the heads off of bats?
Probably.
In his concerts. Yeah. I want to talk about the ambiguous ending for a moment, because I actually usually like an ambiguous ending. And I agree with both of you. I did not like this one. And I was thinking about it, and another film that is kind of an ambiguous ending, but still shows you the scope, like the holy fuck, oh shit, this is an apocalyptic ending that immediately came to mind, that goes from a very self-contained place, is The Invitation.
Oh yeah.
And that is such a powerful final frame, because you see the scope of what's happening, that it's not just happening in this one house, it's happening all over. And I love that. And this film could have done something like that, where you don't really explain fully, still very ambiguous, you don't know what's going to happen. But yeah, we need to see something more than what was shown here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just everything you're saying, both of you, except for the acting, which I know you don't agree with me on, which is totally fine, obviously. But I agree with everything else you guys are saying. And I keep coming back to, this story has been told in other ways better, more many times.
Many times.
But there's nothing interesting. There's nothing new. There's nothing innovative. There's nothing interesting about this story and what it has to say. And that's what was extremely frustrating to me, on top of all the other frustrations I had. It's like, if you want to show unpleasant people, if you want to show a family turning on each other, if you want to show that humans are the real villains, which is such an overused one, and it's a theme I am completely on board with and fine with and find quite fascinating, you have to say something new. You have to say something compelling, and it just is not happening here.
I mean, the one of the things when Shauna and I watched this, she kept reminding me of the monsters are due on Maple Street, the Twilight Zone episode, which is about the very same premise. The neighbors tear each other apart because of, the power goes out and they don't know why, and they start blaming each other. And there is that great moment at the end of the episode where the aliens are talking amongst themselves, like, see, all we have to do is kind of like mess with them a little bit and they'll destroy each other. I mean, you can even have something simple as that, or like, I think of Cabin in the Woods, like the moment at the end where it's like you see the giant, whatever, smash his hand down. You're like, okay, yeah, now I understand the scope of what's going on here. And it is what the movie has been building to. Like, even something like that, I feel like would have been more satisfying. But one thing I forgot to mention, also on the like problematic train revolving the relationship, is that the character that's the one who the witchy one, the one who wants to like do this ritual, Amy is coded Jewish. She has a Star of David tattoo on her hands, which you see in one of the scenes. And I also feel like that's kind of uneasy, awkward, problematic, of having like the Jewish character be like, yeah, I'm the one who's doing all this weird fucked up stuff and triggering the end of the world.
Yeah.
Anyway,
barf.
I did not see the Star of David tattoo on her hand.
Neither did
I was
I.
probably too annoyed by that point. not to make excuses. But no, Evan, I'm really glad you brought that up, because you're right. That adds another awful layer to everything awful. Yikes.
It was weird. It's something that you kind of see it very quickly, and like she raises her hand and you see the tattoo in her hand, but it's just, it was just another way that this movie kind of rubbed me the wrong way as well. Well, that was definitely a lot. We had a lot to say about this movie.
God.
Is there anything else? Oh, you know what? You guys were talking before about your notes. One note I kept writing over and over again: stop picking at that wound. I literally wrote that in my notes multiple times. Stop picking. I was basically yelling at the screen. I was yelling at her to stop picking that wound.
Yeah, that was gross. Oh, this is the last thing I wrote. This is all deeply unpleasant. Oh, I also write, when the snake bites Dad's face, I was reminded of the end of I Don't Feel at Home in This World Anymore by Megan Blair. There. You remember that, Evan? Or I don't know if you saw that, Megan.
I haven't seen it.
The snake, all those snakes biting that guy's face.
Yep.
Yeah. Anyway.
I do like Macon Blair, but I haven't seen it. But anyway. But this just makes me want to go see The Vast of Night again, because I do like Sierra McCormick in that.
Mm-hmm. Well, can't win them all, unfortunately.
Nope.
I know, and I always feel bad hating a film, but yeah, wow, this one was a doozy.
We have had a bunch of really poor movies in the last month. It's kind of a shock.
Yeah, I know. I was gonna say, especially for you, Dave, because like I haven't agreed with all of your dislikes. But when I saw this one, I was like, oh, we're adding to the list.
Yeah. You guys had to be watching this going like, Dave's gonna fucking hate this. But
I actually, I didn't think either of you were gonna like it actually. Yeah. But Dave, I knew you were gonna hate it.
Yeah. I knew you weren't gonna like it either, because like for the same reasons we both didn't like it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh God. Anyway.
Yep. In terms of,
I will say. Oh, I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, in terms of like mixed bag movies, I think of that line from The Big Lebowski, Sam Elliott's character: "Sometimes you eat the bar, sometimes the bar eats you."
Yep.
Yeah. I was just gonna say, when you're reading the behind the scenes of a film and that's more interesting than the film, that's an issue.
Oh, yeah. For sure.
I always think about, it's Gene Siskel. He said, what's more interesting, the movie you're watching or a documentary of the actors and director having lunch?
Ooh.
That's how you know what's a good movie and what's not a good movie.
I don't know if that would be good for me, though, because I always want to see a documentary about actors and directors while they're eating.
Right.
Because I'm a weirdo.
I'm also picturing a twisted situation where craft services was set up so that these people would have to eat their lunch in the bathroom as well. They'd be stuck there even for eating on their break for like authenticity.
I know we're wrapping up, but like, yes, you want to go into the bathroom if there's a tornado warning. And I know the kid Bobby keeps thinking that there's going to be a tornado. And mom's like, no. But why the fuck wouldn't you bring in some snacks? Because even if you're in a room for a couple hours, I don't know about y'all, but I get hungry.
Yeah, same.
So anyway,
snacks, phone chargers. There's many things you would think that someone
water.
Would water.
Well, yeah, I mean, they have water there, but yeah, it's just bizarre to me that they brought literally nothing.
Yeah. That was actually irking me throughout the movie too. So I'm glad that you mentioned it, especially too.
Oh, good.
Because we recently had a hurricane pass through here, and we had preparations of flashlights, some water, some basic things you will need in this situation. I know this seems kind of last minute. It all kind of comes on quickly, but I agree. Like, you probably would bring your phone charger and probably at least bring a couple of things to eat, even if you're there for a couple hours. Anyway.
Yeah. Bring a bag of chips, something like, yeah, I know it felt really petty bringing it up, but I'm like, but wait a minute. No, that's ridiculous. Yeah. or if for whatever reason you don't want them to have those things, then you have to have something that explains why.
Yeah. This movie's not that smart.
All right. Let's bring it in for a landing here. So, on Broadway, which is, I think, going to be available on demand. I don't know if it's going to.
No, it's in theaters.
Oh, it's going to be in theaters.
It's in theaters,
okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
See it or don't see it?
I'd go with it.
I would also say see it.
I'm a no, but you know my reasons. I won't belabor the point. Bob Ross, Happy Accidents, Betrayal, and Greed, which is available on Netflix. See it or don't see it?
It's a hard one for me. I don't know.
Yeah, me too.
I mean, if you don't want to taint your Bob Ross memories, probably not.
I was just gonna say, I think it's a fine documentary in that it's, it's well crafted. It's okay. But yeah, personally for me, I think I'd rather just watch the joy of painting.
Yeah, for sure.
But I'm not recommending it, not because it's a bad documentary or anything like that, because it's not.
I would say see it. And I think, although it does not live up to the salaciousness of its title, I think there is something interesting in telling a story where like all of the salaciousness and the like, I don't know, the conflict, the evil is in the mundanity of the situation, where you have people who used legal means to get what they wanted, and it was still super gross and unsavory, and it's just kind of this thing that happened, and there's no real way to stop it or do really anything about it. So there's these people who control Bob Ross's legacy while his son can have no access to it. Anyway,
interesting point. Yeah, good point.
it sounds like none of us are recommending we need to do something.
Oh, hell no.
I think Dave joked in a text, we need to do something about who picked this movie.
Yeah.
Yes, and I said you can blame me because I thought the premise sounded fantastic. I was really eager to see this.
You can blame me too. I thought it sounded interesting. I thought it would be a great premise for a movie. So I'll also accept culpability for this.
So you both owe me is what I'm getting from this, and just wait till just wait till I tell you what I want to see next week. Okay.
Oh,
I'm scared.
Okay. So those are the movies that we saw this week. Want to say a huge thank you to our editor, Otto Clammer. Otto, thank you for everything you do week to week. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, Otto.
Thanks, Otto.
You can find the show anywhere you get podcasts. You can also find us at our website, which is spoilerpiece.com. We are all over social media. We're Spoiler Piece Theater on Facebook. We're at Spoiler Piece on Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, and TikTok. And if you want to get in touch with us, you want to tell us we're right, tell us we're wrong about any of these films, or just want to say hi or ask us a question, any of those things, send us an email. We're spoilerpiece@gmail.com, or you can give us a call
at 862-21-PEACE.
You can leave us a message. You can send us a text message, apparently. Any of these things are options or ways to get in touch with us.
I'm so tickled that people can text us.
Me too. If you like the show, please rate and review us by going to ratethispodcast.com/spoilerpiece. Rating and reviewing the show helps more people find it, and we greatly appreciate it. And if you really, really like the show, you should join our Patreon. And this week, for our exclusive audio for Patreon, we talked about the Idol Pino film, The Hitchhiker from 1953, which was a really fun conversation. And so if you go to patreon.com/spoilerpiece, you can sign up to get exclusive audio week to week. You can vote in polls and other goodies. So definitely check that out as well. My name is Evan Crean. I am co-chair of the Boston Online Film Critics Association and co-author of your 80s Movie Guide to Better Living. You can follow me on Twitter, Letterboxd, and Instagram as Real Recon, and that's real as in film reel.
My name is Megan Kearns. I'm a contributor to Edge Media Network. I, too, am a member of the Boston Online Film Critics Association. You can follow me on Twitter at OpinionSWorld and on Instagram and Letterboxd at TheOpinionS.
And my name is Dave Riedel. I write about movies. You can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd as Dave Sees Movies. Oh, and I'm also a member of Bobka. So there you go.
Yeah, you are. And
I am.
Thank you for listening, and we will see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.